So I did get the opportunity to take a road trip this last fall, and I put in the little teaser for this. I visited 6 different tourist railroads in the Southwest, and my question was, is there anything to see? And I'm going to do the spoiler that for me, yes, the answer was yes. There was lots to see. I think that a lot of these outfits really have some well-preserved vintage trains, and depending on your modeling interests, you definitely could find some things there that could inspire you. So my hope is tonight that I can maybe show you some pictures of some things I saw and inspire you to on some of your projects or to visit some of these places. So the map there shows the ones I went to. I visited the Virginia and Truckee, Railtown, 1897, Yosemite and Sugar Pine, Nevada Northern, Durango and Silverton, and the Cumbres and Toltec, which was quite a road trip. So 3 of these were narrow gauge and 3 were standard gauge. So hopefully there's something for everybody tonight to see. All of these were preserved very well. They've done a really good job. I was impressed by all the property.
And you went down to Tucson too.
Yeah, yes, I did. I didn't go do a tourist railroad there. So all of these really did a great job of showing what it was like in the day. They all had steam running. There were some diesels as well. I mentioned in the teaser that they're all remote. Each one of these is not on the beaten path. You have to really want to go to them. They're not on any interstate highway. So some of them, like the Nevada Northern, are way out of the way. So you have to make an effort to get there. The other thing that's interesting is that they all had different business models, really. Some of them were very short rides that were very affordable. Other ones were all-day affairs that you would have to devote more money to and time. I'm going to go through all 6. I'm going to pause in between each one of them and just I'd appreciate it if you have any questions or comments, if you could put that in the chat window, and I'll check that when I pause, and then we'll open it up for discussion at the end. But I think that that's the way we'll deal with the questions. So my first stop was Railtown, 1897, and this is Scott Buckley country down in the Sierra Nevadas of California. This was in Jamestown, California. This is the ticket for my ride. You can see it was only $15. They have a very short ride that you can go on. It's about 45 minutes. They back up 3 miles and then come up a pretty good grade. I think it's 3% grade uphill. So they're working pretty hard. And it's in Jamestown, California. This railroad was founded in 1897. It's a Sierra Railroad, and originally served a lot of the mining industries up there, interests, and then eventually became a great timber hauler for some of the big companies like the Westside Lumber and the Pickering out of Tuolumne and Standard. So the cool thing about this site is it's now a state park, and it's well preserved. The grounds are the same that they've been for the last 100 years. And they have a very nice, here's a map of what they look like. This was in the 50s. The red line is the Sierra Railroad, and then the black lines are the connecting. So there's not much of this still exists, but most of that solid red is what is still there for the Sierra Railroad, and Jamestown is right in the middle. And you can see that they connected with the Westside Lumber and the Pickering Lumber up here, and the Hetch Hetchy Railroad as well. So this is what it looks like. There's a very nice roundhouse facility that's 100 years old. It's been, this is the way it's been for the last 100 years. And I'm going to try to point out some things here that are modeling interests. I've tried to learn from Jim Sable, when you go to these places, to look at the details and just look at the timbers and the junk on the ground there in front of the turntable. And the other thing that was interesting is the color of the roundhouse. And then this locomotive that's in the picture, this is the one they used to pull the train with. This is a diesel locomotive that was, it's a Baldwin Whitcomb that was a ex-US Army engine that runs, they pull this, they do steam part of the time and diesel part of the time. So this is kind of interesting, a stub switch leading up to the turntable. And for those of you that know that the back, that don't know, the back rails move instead of the points. There's a good overall view of the roundhouse and the turntable. You can see the date stone in the side. It says AD 1922. So this is really literally 100 years old. Again, some junk along the side there, some timbers. Here's a view inside the roundhouse. And again, you know, thinking about what's in your roundhouses. Some of this is more modern, but a lot of it, you know, is junk just strewn about and hanging on the walls and tools and whatnot. This is a Hetch Hetchy railroad car that was built in the 1920s. It could carry 13 passengers. Evidently, it had a turntable underneath it. It could turn itself, pop itself up and turn, which was interesting. It's primarily used as during the dam building up there on the Hetch Hetchy River for an ambulance car and to carry the injured and the dead to the hospital off the project, it said. So kind of an interesting piece of a critter. Here's a good shot of where they park the steam engine at night, showing you some of the details in the roundhouse. And based on this, my roundhouse is way too clean. I need to get some greasy stuff on the floor, I think. Okay, so they have a number of steam locomotives that are active and inactive there. This one happens to be a 3-truck Shay. Number 2, my understanding is it's not in service right now. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a side shot of this, but there's number 2. Number 3 is a Rogers 460. I believe that this one runs. It was not running the day I was there, but it is marked as serviceable. And here is number 34, which I believe is a Mikado, a 282. It was, it's being restored, but I believe that this one has run in previous years. And, you know, Scott can correct me on all this stuff because this is where he grew up. I noticed that they must use this for tours because they have labels on it. There's the firebox and the boiler. So they must be able to point this out to tours. There's the sand dome. So kind of interesting. And again, look at the junk strewn about there. Okay, I found this to be an interesting locomotive. This is not an RS1, but an MRS1. And they had several of these on the property that are evidently not operable. But the story with these is that they were built by Alco back in the early 50s for the US Army. And I think they built some 90 some of them. And they were for future Army campaigns overseas in case that they had to go in and use them on the railroads. That's why they're built to such a low clearance. My understanding is that there was 90 of these built in the 50s and they were never ever used for any combat or wartime activities. So I believe it was in the late 70s or 80s, they had all these locomotives stored and they sold them or started using them on military bases. So they never ever saw any service. Here's a couple of center cabs that they had there. One's a 45 ton and one's an 80 ton. The cool thing about this one is that it's got the side rods on the side. You can see, it looks like something out of a Lionel catalog to me. Very cool. I was in the middle of a project of painting a Plymouth switcher on my layout when I took this trip. So I was on the hunt for Plymouths and I found one here. Very cool little critter. I was hoping I'd see a lot more during my tour, but I think this is the only one I got to see. So very cool looking little critter. And I believe this one is operational. So this was the star of the show the day I was there. This is number 28, which is a 280 consolidation, and beautiful locomotive and about a 3-car passenger train. unfortunately, the day I was there was during their harvest festival. So they had it decorated with skeletons and cobwebs all over it, which I thought was pretty hideous, really. But I guess it was for the time of the year. So otherwise, this was absolutely a beautiful locomotive. This one was built in 1922 and ran marvelously. Here's an iconic shot from the Sierra Railroad of all the switches going off. You see these in a lot of brochures, but the little speeder that was on fire watch, most of these railroads had speeders following them to make sure that they didn't ignite the right of way or the side brush from cinders or sparks. Kind of the classic photo of the firemen filling the tank. I thought this picture turned out pretty well. Again, looking at the details, you've got kind of some rust spots on that and a pretty banged up spout. A lot of the water didn't get into the tank. It just kind of slopped over onto the top, which I found kind of interesting. Again, you can see a skeleton up on the tender, which was kind of bizarre. This is a log loader that sits at the entrance to the property from Pickering Lumber. I thought that was kind of interesting, pretty rusty, but you can imagine what that thing was like in its when it was operational. Okay, I drove out to Tuolumne where the Westside Lumber had their big mill, and this is the famous Heisler that worked the mill out there, and they have it on display in the park out there. Pretty sharp little locomotive. I know I've seen photos and videos of it, I believe, working in the late 50s, early 60s still. They were running this thing. So very cool. So the day I was there, they actually had a night run that they had a private group running. So I went back and tried to take some night photography. Don't really know what I'm doing with that, but I got a couple shots. And it was a lot of fun to hear this locomotive coming up that 3% grade in the stillness at night. It was just echoing off of the canyons down there. It was just a lot of fun. There's actually another photographer there that kind of led me to where to go to take some photos, and we got to get a little bit acquainted. And then at the end of the run, they took the locomotive to the roundhouse and put it away for the night. So that's number 28 being put to bed for the night. And that was my experience at Railtown 1897 in Jamestown. Scott, did I get all the facts right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, I'll go ahead and move on then. So the next property I visited was a Virginia and Truckee. This is a standard gauge operation out of Virginia City, Nevada. I didn't know a lot about it other than, seeing some photos of locomotives, but this line was originally established back in 1868, so very early, and it was to support all the mining and silver mines on the Comstock lode up in Virginia City. So they ran from Reno down to Carson City and then up the hill to Virginia City, and they had a branch to Minden in Nevada. This railroad was actually abandoned in 1950 and I believe completely torn up. There was a guy named Robert Gray that decided that he liked the Virginia and Truckee so much that he should start rebuilding it. And in the 1970s, started relaying track from Virginia City and ended up getting it operational by about 1976 for tourist operations. And then eventually they extended it down to Gold Hill, and it was about 3.5 miles down to there. And then more recently, the Virginia and Truckee received a healthy grant to actually rebuild the main line from Gold Hill down to the east part of Carson City. So they actually, to my knowledge, rebuilt 14 miles on the original right-of-way. And so they actually now run trains, both the short one to Gold Hill, and they run one out of a place called Eastgate in Carson City up to Virginia City. So the train ride is about a 35-minute trip. It's just down to Gold Hill and back that I rode. Again, they back down the hill and then go up the hill. And it's a very steep run on the way up, probably about a 3% grade and very curvy. So this was the star of the show the day I was there. This is number 29. This is actually Robert Gray, the guy that built this, bought this locomotive in an auction in the 70s. And this is an ex-Longview, Portland, and Northern Railroad locomotive. So this could have run in Washington State because LP&N had at least two lines that were active in Washington State, one that ran out of Vader to Riderwood, and the other one that ran from Vancouver up to Battleground. And then they had, I know, at least one or two lines down in Oregon. So I couldn't find any information on where this originally ran, but this is a little consolidation that could have been out of Washington State. This was just obtained by the Virginia and Truckee in, I believe, August of this year. This is the original Reno locomotive, which I believe is the oldest existing locomotive they had, built in 1872. So they just got it back. It was sold to Paramount Studios, or I guess it was old Tucson Studios, MGM Pictures. And they had it for many years for use in movies and whatnot. And they pretty much beat it up and really abused it. They just, if you can imagine, blew it up, set it on fire, had it in train wrecks. So it's in pretty rough shape. But they're very happy to get this back because the old Tucson Studios down in Tucson recently went out of business, and they were able to obtain this back. They are planning to restore it to at least cosmetic state. So in the future, that thing should be looking really good. It looked pretty rough right now. Here's the shops in Virginia City. Nice little shop facility. I was observing that this track work here kind of looks a little like something I would try to lay in my model railroad. Pretty kinked up track there. So somehow they get their trains around that, but kind of interesting that I thought that didn't look very good. That's like a reverse S curve coming off of a turnout going into another one. So looks like trouble to me. This is what the train looks like. Very short, converted caboose and a gondola. This is them backing down the hill out of Virginia City. So the train ride goes down to Gold Hill, which this is the original depot. It's about 3.5 miles from Virginia City. They stop there for a few minutes and then blast up the hill. And this is what it looks like going up the hill. They're working pretty hard. Again, I believe this is a 3% grade going up this hill. And also pretty curvy too. So the engine works pretty hard going up that hill. And you got a tunnel that they've restored that it goes through. So that's a lot of fun. And that's what the train looks like when it's coming up the hill. And here we are coming back up into Virginia City, and you can see the buildings of the town up on the hill in the background. Virginia City, I believe, is 7,000 feet above sea level. Pretty high up there. And I got a photo of the guy doing the water on this train as well. They have a water tank about halfway up the hill. So this was the other train they were running the day I was there. This is a train that comes up out of Carson City, and it was about 3 passenger cars. So the idea is you get on down at Eastgate in the morning. They take you up to Carson City, or up to Virginia City, and you have the day there. And then I think they load it up about 3 in the afternoon to take it back down. So you ride the train up, spend the day in Virginia City, and then ride the train back down. I was very pleased to discover, after I got back home and did some research on this locomotive, that this is an ex-Northern Pacific SW1200 built in 1957 and still running. So very interesting that they had got this through several owners, but they have obtained it, I think, fairly recently. It wasn't too long ago that they got this. Yeah, they got it in 2016. So here's the Eastgate Depot at the bottom of the hill. I happened to be driving back when the train was coming in there, so I was able to get a picture of it. And so this is where you would board and go up to the Virginia City for the day. Okay, the days that they don't run with steam, they use the center cab diesels to pull the train. And this is D3. This is a originally it was a U.S. Marine Corps locomotive. I think a pretty attractive paint scheme, actually. And that's what the train looks like when they're running without the steam locomotive, when they're running the diesel. And there's the picture of the Gold Hill Depot. So they, again, back down to Gold Hill and then blast up the hill. Okay, in Carson City, there's also some Virginia and Truckee artifacts. They've got several restored locomotives that are absolutely beautiful. This is the Dayton, built in 1873, a 440. Very nice and shiny. I believe this is operational, but I'm not 100% sure. Here is the Inyo, which was built in 1875. And again, just gorgeous. Gorgeous locomotives. This is an odd duck, I thought. These are all at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. This is a little rail car out of Arizona off of the Tucson, Cornelia, and Gila Bend Railroad, which was a little mining operation that ran out of Ayo, Arizona, up to Gila Bend. So this car provided the passenger service through 1945, and somehow the Nevada Museum got it. It is operational, and the museum has a circle of track there that they run on weekends. They were not running it the day I was there, but nice little modeling project. If you were so inclined, that would be a neat little vehicle to operate or to build. This is a narrow gauge locomotive. This is the Glenbrook. It was built in 1875. This actually did service a lot of logging lines around the Sierra Nevadas over the years. And eventually the museum obtained it and restored it to working condition. This had just been over to the Cumbres and Toltec for a weekend of vintage steam locomotives that I believe Bill was there for that weekend. So you can maybe tell us about that a little later. Beautiful locomotive. They had it in the shop there, kind of doing something to it after it just returned. Gorgeous. And I thought I'd found another Plymouth, but I think this turned out to be something else. I think this was a Davenport for their shop switcher. Okay, so they have both narrow gauge and standard gauge at the museum there. So here's a switch that you could scratch build if you're so inclined, a dual gauge with a stub end on it and one of the harp switch stands. If you look at this thing, it's actually only dual gauge on the diverging route. It's kind of interesting. It must have 3 different positions when you throw that turnout, but the straight through is just standard gauge. So that'd be quite a project. Nice little gallows turntable in the background there too. Okay, they also have a McKean motor car there. This was a Virginia and Truckee, served as passenger service for the Virginia and Truckee, I believe through the 40s. The history of this thing is pretty amazing. And I think it was a diner in Carson City for a while. And then eventually the museum was able to obtain it, and they've restored it to working condition with completely new motor in it. I was very interested in this because Union Pacific had a number of these that they ran back in the 1920s and 19-teens and 20s. And they actually used one of these on the Hoquiam train that ran from Centralia in the 1930s. I got photos of the McKean car on the Union Pacific. So I was kind of interested in that. Again, if you're there on the weekend, this thing operates often and you can actually ride it. That's what the interior looks like. McKean evidently was a boat builder, and so you can see the boat influence on the portals that are on the side windows there. It was beautiful on the inside. So that does it for the Virginia and Truckee. So hopefully I got all that right, Scott. You probably know more about some of the stuff than I do. Okay.
I just was going to mention that it's what it is a heel boom loader. It's not really a crane. It picks up log, at the balance point, and the just past the balance point, and the heel comes up and hits the bottom of the boom, and then they just swing it around where they can drop it onto a car exactly where they want it.
Very cool.
Yeah, Brian, just as a comment, I'm modeling the V&T, member of the Historical Society, a member of the Friends of the Museum. You're spot on all of your comments. Very good.
Oh, good. That's a lot of pressure. I got a tough crowd here. Thank you.
Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw the V&T being the initial rebuild stages as they were starting to rebuild it. This was back in 1980. Of course, I'm trying to think of the name. Who was the photographer, the V&T, the guy who photographed the V&T for years, the flamboyant, I'm drawing blanks on his name.
Lucius Beebe.
Beebe, there you go. Of course, Beebe memorialized the V&T, and he was involved in the last years of it being run. And the other thing too, in that Carson Museum, you showed the end shot of it, but there's this gorgeous combine.
The thing?
Yeah, there, that one right there. I saw that. I think that's it. Yeah. Or something like it. Saw it at Steam Expo in '86. It's a beautifully restored piece of equipment.
Yeah, it was hard to get photos inside the shed there. It was really dark. Okay, anything else on the V&T?
Well, I'll just throw out one other piece. V&T Coach 17 is in the museum. It's in non-restored condition, but it is the Promontory Central Pacific Director's Coach.
Yes,
so it is the only remaining piece of equipment from the Golden Spike ceremony. I think what they're probably going to do is just try to maintain the relic.
Yes.
Because they don't know enough to restore it to the Central Pacific era. There just are no records, there are no photographs of the interior, and the car is in bad shape.
I believe that I saw that it was back behind this thing here,
yes.
Kind of in shambles.
They've got it stabilized. They pulled it out a couple of years ago, but they've got about a 5 foot tall steel beam running down the middle to hold the floor up because the design didn't work back when, and it's finally, worn out. So, but there's a lot of neat equipment. I mean, this is not Sacramento, but a lot of neat equipment in Carson City.
Yeah, they're very similar.
On those portholes that are latched to the ceiling, do they come down and make a double glazed?
Same group did restorations of both museums.
Yeah, the windows that you're seeing now, they're Jim, are open.
I thought I saw a little reflection in them. So,
yeah, no,
so when the portholes from the top come down, that closes the window.
Yep.
How about that?
I thought it was quite unique.
Cajillion dollars in just brass. Wow.
My next stop was the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad. This was a very old narrow gauge operation established in 1874, and their primary purpose was to move timber down to Sugar Pine, where there was a mill, and they cut the logs there into rough cut lumber, and then amazingly, it was put into a flume at Sugar Pine and floated 54 miles down to Madera, California, where it was cut into dimensional lumber and then loaded on the Southern Pacific. System of 54 miles that floated this down to Madera. So this loop that you see here is where the current railroad runs. The original railroad was actually abandoned in 1931. And a fellow named Rudy Stauffer decided that he should rebuild the part of this. So in the 1960s, he started relaying track on this area right here and bought some equipment, and they opened for business about 1967. So they've got a 2-mile line that's reestablished through this loop here of narrow gauge that they run. A very cool operation. So this was the start of the show the day I was there. This is a narrow gauge shay that came from the West Side Lumber Company. I heard the story that when they were starting up, the master mechanic for West Side, they came over and were shopping for shays, and he pointed out that these two were in the best shape. They ended up with number 10 and number 15, I believe. That's what it looked like at the top of the hill there, getting ready for the train. They were making it up. Very nice locomotive, very amazing. They also had these, they called them Jennies, which were built out of Model A's. Again, ran on the West Side Lumber Company. Evidently, they use these on days when they don't run the train. They have just, they can still take 6 or 8 passengers down the hill on this. And they moved the Jennies into the shop. And in the background, you can see the other shay they have, which is operational number 15, which also came from the West Side Lumber Company. One of these, I believe, the 10 was a Pickering, originally Pickering Lumber Company. Cool shop there too. You see, again, a lot of the details. Beautiful shop. Got quite excited because I thought I found another Plymouth, but turns out that this is a Vulcan, which I had no idea what that was, but it's a little narrow gauge diesel. It's not operational, but cool little unit. They had a lot of junk strewn about there with these narrow gauge trucks as well. They also had a center cab. I could not find any vintage on what this is from, but a center cab diesel. So this is what the train ride looks like. They have a train about 6 cars, I guess, and it's very steep. I think that the grade ranges from 4 to 6%. You go down the hill and go around a loop and then come back up the hill. And so this is at the bottom of the hill. This is they take on water there. And again, I had to get the obligatory water filling shot. They let you get off the train. The conductor told me that going up the loop, it was a 9% grade. So this locomotive pulled our train up that, no problem. Going down the loop is 12%, which downhill is no big deal. But he told me that the shays could pull that train up that 12% grade. That's the steepest they have on there. Everything that we've always heard about shays is true. They're very, very powerful, very slow, but very powerful. And here is going back up the hill. You can see the steepness of the grade. 2017, they had some pretty severe fires in this area that got within several feet, I think, of the railroad, and they thought they were going to lose the shop and everything there. There's still a lot of fire damage there, but they were spared, luckily. So a lot of burned timber in this area, actually all over California. So now we're back up at the top of the hill, and you notice that the shay is turned around because you go in a reverse loop at the bottom. So we get to see the other side, which isn't nearly as interesting as the geared side. And there's a good shot of the non-geared side. You can see the pumps on the side there, but kind of interesting. Yeah, like Jim Sable said that they had a flume down in Goldendale that did the same kind of operation in the Goldendale area. So pretty remarkable. I did see a photo, and you guys have probably seen this before, of they had people stationed on that flume every, I don't know, few miles every so often. And their job was to sit there all day and make sure it didn't jam up. So if it jammed up, I guess they got up there with a pickaroo and started trying to get the lumber straightened again and get it going again. I also read accounts that people would ride the flume down to Madera, which seems like it would be very interesting. I'm going to move on to Chama, New Mexico. So this is the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic, which of course was a part of the Denver and Rio Grande Western narrow gauge system. So they are currently in operation on about 64 miles between Antonito, Colorado and Chama, New Mexico. And you can ride this, but they have a train that runs from each end and ends up at the other end. So you can ride from one end to the other and take a bus back, or you can ride up to the midway point, which is Osier, and they have a lunch, big barbecue there, and then take the train back. So there's a lot of different options, but it is an all-day type of commitment. The day that I was there, they had on their website that they were supposed to run a train from Chum up to Cumbres and back, but I don't think they sold enough tickets for it, so they annulled the train that day. I was considering riding that, but I didn't ride the train otherwise. I ended up chasing it in my car and I ended up following it in my car and taking photos. So
You see that millwork above the Chama sign? That's the same millwork that's on the facade of the engine house in Jamestown. Your earlier slide.
Yeah, I just changed the sign out.
Yeah, that must have been really popular millwork at the time.
So when you come into the parking lot in Chama, they have this warning sign here. Evidently, they've gotten some complaints that people got soot on their cars. So anyway, kind of sets the stage. The cool thing about this property, and Bill can chime in on this because he's really up on it, is it's very authentic, and they do a great job of restoration. And it's like they walked away from this thing when it shut down, and it's they've done a great job at restoring a lot of the equipment, but most of it is just authentically the way it was. And you can see this is a very modelable yard. It's very good size for a model railroad. If you were going to model something after this, you could get a lot of switching in it. And this is the famous snowplow, the OY. I believe most springs, I think, run plow specials up to the top to plow the line open for the year, which would really be something to see. I would love to go do that someday. A very good project if you're going to try to model that would be quite the project. South of town, they have an old stockyard that they're restoring. So if you are interested in building a stockyard, you could go and see what one really looked like in its heyday there. Beautiful setting in Chama. Okay, I caught up with the train the first day I was there. This is the westbound coming from Antonito to Chama. This is up at Los Pinos Loop, about 9,000 feet. So we're up there in the mountains. And that's what the train looks like. We got the 484 running that day, which let's see, that was built in 1925. It's a Mikado K36. Okay, here's the top up at Cumbres. I had a beautiful day for photography. They stopped up at the top here. This is at 10,022 feet. So think about that, 10,000 feet. They stopped here. Some people got off and got on a tour bus and left, but they were there for quite a while. So I was able to get a number of pictures. By the way, I think I took about 5,000 pictures on this trip, but I'm just showing you a few of them tonight. There's the locomotive against the blue sky. Just gorgeous. It was just wonderful. There's a train about ready to depart to head down the hill. They're at 10,000 feet, and I think what was Chama 7,000. So quite a climb. They also had a fire watch running there. A little speeder follows behind the train to make sure that there was nothing set on fire. So I found this really cool S-curve about halfway down the hill that you're going to see a number of photos from. So this is the 484 and his train running through that. And I was there in October, so the fall colors were really in bloom, and it was very, very beautiful. Interesting, while I was standing here waiting for the train, I couldn't see them, but I heard some cowboys down in that valley herding their cattle. They're whooping it up and whistling and yelling, and you could hear dogs down there too with them. So it was interesting. This is the Lobato Trestle, I believe it is called, just north of Chama.
Yeah, that is the Scott. That is the Lobato trestle. You're right, Brian.
All right, thank you, Bill. Keep me honest. So this is coming into town, 44 with that train. So the cool thing about Chama, which I've been there before, and I really cherish this because you have free access to the property. Most people are kind of used to the atmosphere of railroads these days and stand off. But if you walk right out there, no one's going to bug you. So they turned this engine on the Y south of town, and I was able to just follow it on foot as they serviced it, which was just way cool. So you just wander around there. The only thing, they don't want you to go into the machine shop where, could get injured, but they just ask that you don't get run over or hurt. So followed them up to the pit. They dumped their cinders and ashes there, and the guy spent probably 20 minutes cleaning out everything with the air hose and the water hose, and I watched him do all that. The sun was starting to go down, and they pulled back into the engine house there, which is, I believe, and I don't know the history of this, but that was obviously built at a later date. They had an older dwelling that was there earlier, but this was a much more modern building that they service the engines in. And that's what it looks like inside. So they backed the engine through. There's a nice drop pit there, and you can see a lot of the machinery here. Some of the details that, Jim's taught me well. Look at some of the details here. If you're going to build this, what you would put in there as a model. So I think this is my favorite photo that I took. It was getting dark, so the light was getting pretty dim, but I got this kind of fuzzy picture. It almost looks like a painting of these guys using the grease guns on it, greasing it up for the night. So it turned out to be one of my favorites. Almost looks like a painting to me. All right, early the next morning, I was up with the locomotives. So they brought the 484 out, watering them up. Notice the double-sided tank here. Again, you can just wander around the yards and follow these guys. They don't seem to care. And this is the coal tower that's there and the sanding tower. Unfortunately, they don't use the coal tower, but the sanding tower they do use, and I have a photo of them using that later. I didn't have any idea when I built the model. I have a model of this when I built it 40 years ago. It's on my layout of the sanding tower there. This is how they actually fuel the locomotives now, with a front end loader. What was really cool is they evidently had a large group that was going to ride the next day. So they spent probably 45 minutes to an hour switching, making up the train for the next day. I'm basically standing in the middle of their switching, watching them go back and forth. It was quite an experience and a lot of fun to see. Although they had radios, they were using the hand signals. So I got to experience them, pretty much switching how they would have done 60, 80 years ago. And you can see the guy here using his hand signals, and they use the whistle signals religious, if they're going to stop or start, they use the signals. There's a shot of a restored Rio Grande caboose. Very nice. So anyway, it was just a real experience, and kind of thinking about operations on our model railroads, watching these guys. We always talk about how we go way too fast. It's very deliberate, these switching moves and the signals back and forth between the guy on the ground and the locomotive engineer. So it's really quite a good experience to think about that. They do have a diesel on the property. This is evidently from Hawaii, I believe. Yeah, Oahu Railway and Land Company. The note I found on the internet is that it's leased to them. So I don't know if they own it, but and I don't know what they use it for. Bill can maybe fill us in on that. So after all the switching was done, they loaded up the passengers. This is what it looked like when they were blasting out of town. So heading up the hill over the Lobato Trestle again, quite the entourage of cars. Probably anywhere I stopped, there was anywhere from 10 to 12 cars would show up and guys hopping out, taking photos. There's my S-curve that I found. Very nice. So there's a crossing up about halfway up the hill. So I was stationed there to watch them go by. And then about 25 minutes later, you turn around and they're up on this Windy Point Mountain here. And you can see the train, looks like something out of Disneyland or something going around the hill up there. But there they are,
Allen.
way up there. Yeah. I mean, doesn't that just look like mountains in minutes or something? And the colors and the trees, think about when you're building your scenery. That's just beautiful. Okay, here's the train at the summit up at Cumbres, 10,022 feet above sea level. They've actually have a Y up there and a snow shed over the Y it had a sign on it that said Lizardhead Pass. So they've staged some photos there of trains turning supposedly like it would be the Rio Grande Southern, but this is Cumbres. All right, this is on the east side of the pass, coming down the hill. And if you can see at the top, the line comes down, snakes all the way back around, turns back on itself and comes down again and then turns again. So quite the reverse loops here. I've seen a video from, I believe it was the late 50s, early 60s of a freight train coming through here where the brakeman hopped off the caboose at the top of the loop and ran across the meadow and got on the engine as it came by. So very cool scene. And there's the bottom of the loop as they're coming down.
It's
okay.
a Tanglefoot curve, Brian.
Yes, Tanglefoot. Thank you. I was going to say that. Thanks for keeping me honest there, Bill. So this is the westbound of the day. So I hung out and waited. And again, the two trains meet at Osier, and this one was pulling the eastbound or the westbound. Interestingly, while I was waiting there, these guys came through, and we're sitting at about 9,500 feet here, and these guys came through on this road, and they had just shot 4 big elk over in the mountains on the other side of the valley. And they asked me what I was doing, and I said I was waiting for the train. So they pulled off and waited for the train to go by. So they said they'd been hunting out there for years and never seen the train. So they stayed and took photos of it while these big old elk in the back of their trucks. So that day, the 487 was running, built in 1925. It's another K36 with a very nice snowplow on the front of it. Again, this is the train coming down Windy Point Mountain there. You can see it up on the ledge there. So if you note that big rock outcropping right here, so after the train went through there, I drove up the hill and climbed up on top of that rock and took this photo down the hill. So that's what it looked like from up on top there. And you can see the entourage of photographers down there all waiting for the train. Every time I stopped there, I swear there was 8 or 10 cars would show up and people would pile out with their cameras waiting for it. So it was a lot of fun. When I was at the crossing waiting for the train, there was one of the railroad employees showed up to flag the crossing, and I started chatting with him about snow levels. And he said that he figured it would start snowing any day. And it actually did snow 3 days after I was there. And I said, well, how deep does it get it? And he was pointing to the crossbuck at that crossing. He said, up over the top of that. So they get some serious snow up here. Here's my S curve with the train coming down the hill. And another view of it with the going down. I didn't notice, just today when I was looking at this, I got some guy's arm in the side there. Need to crop that out of there. He was one of the fellow photographers. So back down at Chama, I noticed that they had this 455 steamed up, and I got all excited. I was actually telling Bill about this. I thought I had actually found an authentic Rio Grande Southern locomotive. But come to find out, the real 455 had been scrapped many years ago. This was actually a number 463 repainted into Rio Grande Southern paint scheme, and it's a little bit smaller locomotive, a K27. That train they were making up for the next day, they were setting it up for a double header. So this guy was going to double head with that 487 going up the hill. So I did not stick around for that. I should have, but that would have been quite the sight. Remember, I said they do use the sand tower. Here's the guy sanding up the engine out of the sand tower and taking on water for the 455. So there they have it all set up for the next day for a double header. Very cool. And my parting shot, I went over at night and took some photos of the engines all ready to go. These guys were working well. This is probably 10:30 at night. They were still going strong over there servicing, and I don't know what they were doing. They were blowing the whistles continually, move ahead, back up. So very cool. The only thing that ruins it is that front end loader in the side there. But so that's it for Cumbres and Toltec. I don't see anything in the chat window. Anyone want to make any comments? Bill, did I get it right?
Yeah, you did. Let's face it, look at how beautiful the trees are. I mean, you just think that you went down to the McKenzie Brothers tree company in Vacaville and bought all those aspens, I mean, isn't it wonderful to take pictures in almost any direction and get them beautiful? It's just a wonderful place to go.
Yeah, and I got really lucky with the puffy clouds and the blue sky. It was just gorgeous. It was perfect.
And that 10,000 feet, some elevation is approximately the same elevation as Camp Muir on the slope of Mount Rainier, where people overnight before attacking the summit. Gee.
And I was out there shirt sleeve.
Yeah, that is up there.
Yeah,
we did the Cumbres and Toltec a number of years ago. We drove down from Denver proper and spent the night in Antonito. I do not recommend the narrow gauge motel there. It's a little cramped. We got on the bus the next day, and then they took us over to Chama, and you're right about accessibility in the Chama yard. I mean, I walked around, and I don't know how many pictures I took. And it was just great. And then we took the train up and over back to Antonito. We stopped at Osier and went in, and they had a great lunch, great spread. So it's a fabulous trip if you can do it.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And I just really love how accessible it is. So I was there wandering around the yards, taking photos, just drinking in the environment. And these other two guys were there taking pictures. They're from, I think, Wisconsin or something. And they were just going crazy. They were just, oh, this is awesome. The guy turned to me, he goes, this is way better than the Durango and Silverton.
I have to agree. There's definitely more to see with this one. We've done Durango and Silverton before, and I thought that was awesome. This one beat it hands down.
Yeah.
Well, the Durango and Silverton back in the late 50s was really, really good. Mary and I rode that back then. Now it's show business.
Yeah.
It's like Knott's Berry Farm, Indians and arrows and cowboys with 6 guns blazing, and oh yeah,
That's
show
true.
business.
Well, speaking of which, my next stop was Durango. So
Yeah.
I went over
Hey,
to Durango.
Brian, Bob
Yeah, go ahead.
Butler,
Hi,
finally
Bob.
got through. One comment on the Lobato Bridge. That was destroyed in a fire about 3 years ago, and it
That's
cost
right.
them several million to restore it. And
That's
when
right.
they operate a double header, they have to separate the engines, take one across, and then bring the second engine with the train across.
I've heard that. Yeah, I forgot about that fire. Thanks for bringing that up, Bob. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's amazing that they have restored it. So my next stop was Durango, and since I was in the neighborhood, I thought I'd drop by. The morning I was there, they actually ran 3 trains, one right after another. So I got there very early. This is what it looked like at 8 a.m. or actually about 7:30. So the first train out is actually run by a diesel now, and you can see that number 107 there, which is, you probably recognize as an ex White Pass and Yukon that they bought just, I think, a year ago. 2020, and probably as a fallout from some of the fires that they were supposedly setting. But anyway, they used that to run the first train, and you can see in this photo also a center cab there and another steamer that's steamed up. There's a better photo of the 107. They just basically repainted Durango and Silverton over the White Pass and Yukon. Nice engine. Those evidently those are built by Alco up in Canada, the Montreal Locomotive Works, in the late 60s and early 70s. So they're relatively new. There you can see a couple of the center cabs there. After the first train left with the diesel, then this 493 came out and got on top of his train. He was the second one out of town. I wandered down the platform there and I got all excited because I found what I thought was the original Silver Vista car, but as I found out and learned later, this was actually built in 2006 as a recreation because the original one was destroyed many years ago. But very nice replica of the original Silver Vista. So there's the 493 there, and you got the Hogger kind of hamming it up for me. Very nice looking locomotive, built in 1928. It's a K37, so a little bit bigger one. Yeah, it may be showbiz, but I'll tell you what, it's still narrow gauge and it's very cool and nice steam engines. So I hot-footed it up to Hermosa, which is, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 miles north of Durango, and waited for the train to come up. They had a nice water tower up there and some other stuff. And eventually the train came along. So it runs up the valley there. And then from here, it really heads up the hill. I did not pursue it further than this. I headed back down, and the next train, which was right behind it, about a half hour, was pulled by this one. And this is, I think, yeah, the 473, built in 1923. Another nice looking locomotive. So they just shotgun these things out of town. Diesel went out at 8 o'clock. I think the first steam engine went out at 9, and then this guy left at 9:30. So bam, 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 3 trains heading north in the morning. They were all full, by the way, too. There's probably, I don't know, several hundred people on each of those trains. So they were doing good business that day. And of course, they had to have the fire watch following them. So again, that seems to be a standard procedure. So that's it for my Durango and Silverton. Anyone want to make any comments on that one? I was not there. I was only there for a morning, but I enjoyed it a lot.
They're doing a lot of work up at Silverton, aren't they? The preservation guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Jim, that's a good point. Both Durango and Chama, the right-of-ways on these lines, they look just beautiful to me. They've really done well with ballasting and keeping them up to date. They look like they're just very well maintained, both properties. So,
Brian, if you don't mind making a comment. In 2018, I was fortunate to ride both lines. Yeah, sure, the states of Colorado and New Mexico own it, and they help it out and all that kind of jazz. But the owners of the Durango and Silverton are not putting the time and trouble into the rail that they are on the Cumbres and Toltec. Remember seeing a ballast regulator and all that kind of stuff up at Cumbres when I rode Cumbres and Toltec. Huge difference in the track. I rode in both cases in a parlor car. When I came back from Silverton on the Durango and Silverton, it was like a carnival ride. That track coming down through the canyon of the Animas is not well maintained compared to the Cumbres and Toltec. And I have to give the guys at the Cumbres and Toltec thumbs up for what they do.
yeah, their line looked amazing to me. They looked very well maintained. So,
Brian, Durango has converted one of their coal-fired engines to oil-fired and may convert some more. This is due to the fire dangers up there.
yeah, I know they got into big trouble here a few years back with lighting some fires, and so.
Well, the guy who owns Durango and Silverton owns Tom Murray's former property up at Mineral. And one of the reasons that Mineral has been getting the short end of the stick is because the guy took such a beating from that fire down on the Silverton line. He's really low on cash.
Well, I enjoyed my morning there. I didn't spend a lot of time, and I did not ride the train, but I got to see some really neat stuff and some great scenery. So I'm going to move on to my last stop, which was the Nevada Northern in Ely. So this operation is a standard gauge one, built in 1905, so actually relatively late. It was a 140-mile line that ran from down here in Ely. There's a couple mines that fed it here, and there was a smelter at McGill, and then ran up, this is a sideways map, ran up north to connect with the Western Pacific and the Southern Pacific at Shafter and Cobra. So that's the way the line was. The current train is really just centered around Ely. It's not very long, even though the line is still in existence, the whole 140 miles, but it hasn't been used since the late 90s. So it's in pretty rough shape and would take quite a bit to get it operational again. It was shut down in 1999 the last time. So the current ride is about a 14-mile trip, 90 minutes. You can ride it for anywhere from $30 to $200, depending on what kind of seats you want to buy.
On this map, I think that north is to the right.
It is.
I think
it's sideways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see the little legend at the bottom. So the day that I was going there, the weekend I was going there, I noticed on the internet that there was no trains that were running, which I thought was very strange because they were running every single day before and after I was there. And I was like, well, what's up with this? And I did some more research and found out that Trains Magazine had a special excursion going for photographers that weekend that they had all spent thousands of dollars on. And they were there to commemorate the restoration of the number 81 locomotive. So it coincided with the 81st anniversary of Trains Magazine. So they had a group of people as a private party there that they were going to be running this recently restored 81 and doing photo run-bys. And there was stern warnings on the website to do not attend if you do not have a ticket. So I thought, am I going to get thrown off the property? I don't know how this is going to work. So I drove over to Ely and just to see what I could see. And when I got there, I found the trains out in the middle of the desert. So they were way out. This is a zoomed in view. And I had my scanner going. I could hear they were doing photo run-bys. And I thought, well, maybe this is all I'm going to see. And that's okay, because I don't have a ticket and, I don't want to get in trouble here. So I thought I might drive out there and see if I could find where they're doing the photo run-bys. But I only found Jeep trails that went out to this area. So I thought I better not take my car out there. Okay, I'm going to take a picture because this is probably all I'm going to see, and then I'll just move on. But I drove back to town and I found this locomotive switching in the yard. So this is an XSP locomotive, SD9, that was used by the last owner, and they were switching these vintage freight cars in town, which was pretty cool. I don't know what they were doing or why, but they were doing that, and that was pretty fun. So again, I was a little apprehensive. I didn't know if I was going to get booted off the property or what, but pretty soon, here comes the 81 backing into the yard with 2 passenger cars. And so I got a photo of that. I thought, okay, at least I got to see the steam engine a little closer. And they have this very cool wig-wag signal there. That would be a great project for someone if you wanted to do it. So there's the wig and there's the wag. And then pretty soon, here comes the 93 backing in a passenger train into the yard. And this is the one that they normally have used for their daily runs. Very nice locomotive consolidation. Let's see, this one was built in 1909, evidently. The 81 was built in 1917. So that's what the property looks like. There's the yard, and it was full of these people that had bought these tickets to do these photo run-bys for thousands of dollars. So there's a good D93. So I got a little bit more bold as time went on and kind of got up closer and got some photos of them there in the yard. Very, very cool place. And I was talking a little bit before the meeting. It's not anywhere near anything. I think Robert Scott said it's 4 hours from anywhere, but well worth the trip. So I want to go back. There's the 93. Very, very distinct front ends on these things with the handrails and the safety first. They had both locomotives running, and there's a Y just out of town there to turn them on. So they ran the 81 out and turned it, and it was coming back into town, and they were ready to run the 93 out to turn it. So I got a picture of them meeting, which was kind of fun. So I didn't really know what was going on, but this SD9 was making up a train, and these locomotives were running around the yard. And eventually this guy comes over to me that had one of the name tags on, and I thought, oh boy, here I go. I'm going to get shown the door. You know, he says, oh yeah, they're making up a vintage freight train, and they're going to run it out in the desert, and we're going to go do photo run-bys, and you should come out and take some pictures too. And I said, well, you know, I didn't really pay. Oh, no problem. You know, I mean, here's a view of the yard there. And talk about, it looks like they just walked away from this property, which they did, but this looks like 1950 something, and just abandoned this place. But it's still operational and is preserved as a historical site. So anyway, eventually the SD9 gets done making the train up, and the 93 comes along, and the 81 comes along, and there's a good photo. You can see how beautifully restored that is with a nice green jacket. So this thing had only been in service for about a week when they were getting it ready for this 81st anniversary of Trains magazine. So I got the privilege to see it in one of its first venues. And there's the 93. They had watered both of them. They got them all ready to go. So what they were doing is they were setting up a double header. They're getting the locomotives all ready to go and putting them in order. They're backing down onto their train. There's the 81. Well, I was standing there, a load of coal was delivered. So this is how they get their coal now. This truck came in and just dumped the coal on the ground, and they had a front end loader that kind of shoveled it around and got it organized. So that was kind of fun. All right, so eventually all the paying customers came out and got onto this passenger train that was pulled by the SD9. And they headed out into the desert, and they were going to hop off and take photos. And so here's the vintage freight train that they made up with the cool caboose. And they're, if you've been to Ely, it's kind of a strange setup because the yard is single-ended. So you have to, all the trains that leave have to back out to get onto the main line. So they're waiting for the passenger train to get out of the way. So there's a good shot of the caboose, which would be an interesting modeling project for anyone so inclined. You have access to this thing to build. And there's the double header getting ready to go out. I mean, this was just great. It was just awesome. Conductor, they were waiting for the passenger train to clear out of the throat of the yard. You can see the kind of the vintage hopper cars there. So that's what the train looked like. You could pretend like it was coming towards me, but it was really backing up. And there's the passenger train heading up what they call the High Line in the background there. And actually, that's not the High Line. That's the train that goes to, or the line that goes to Ruth. And the double header's heading out. So that's what it looked like when it was going up the hill. There's what the whole train looked like. I thought I had probably pushed my luck for not being a paying customer. So after this took off, I did not follow it out to the mines. I just highballed out of town. So that's why I didn't stay in town there, John. But I got got to see some pretty cool Nevada Northern stuff. So on my way north, this is the only place that the line crosses the highway at Curie, I believe it's called. And you can see the line is in pretty rough shape. But here's the maintenance equipment. Looks like they just walked away from the railroad in the late 90s. And there's a camper and a truck sitting on the line, just sitting there vacated. You can see the facilities in the background. And there's even a depot there with a train order signal that's kind of lonely looking and abandoned, but that's what the line looks like for the rest of it. So that's where I'm going to stop. That's the
Ely's got an amazingly strong fan base. They have it must be at least a dozen guys who take a week's vacation and sleep in the shop building where the railroad welcomes them and makes them comfortable. And they volunteered their labor there for a week at a time. And some guys even go all the way from San Francisco just for the weekend to work and then go back to work Monday morning. Amazing.
Yeah, it was quite a cool property. So we got B&T had a locomotive in Vancouver, Expo 86.
They do generally 2 photography weekends per year. And some of those can be very snowy. I did one about 10 years ago.
Oh,
Had
yeah.
At least
yeah.
2 foot of snow on the ground. They were operating the 40 and the 93 at that time.
Very cool. Yeah, those winter sessions look good, but they look cold.
Okay, when we did the trip, my son and I in 2012, we went towards the open pit mine at Ruth in the steam locomotive. I drove it up the hill, went through the tunnel and all that, and then my son drove it back, and then one of the diesel switchers, it wasn't the SD9, I think it was the Alco, and we went the other way, but not very far out into the desert, and then came back. And then the engineer was kind enough, he said, "Hey, you want to look in the shop?" So we walked in the shop and we're in there. And I just, inside that shop building is amazing. If any of you guys have been there, I mean, there's equipment there that is just, it's monstrous in size, but it's also quite necessary to keep that equipment going. So it was a great trip. And, I've half-lifed all that stuff away, but all of the whistles and the safety information is all in their train service rule book too. So that's something to hang on to. And I got a couple of copies of, I've gone crazy over Nevada Northern. Locomotive and Railway Preservation, a couple of magazines, one from 91 and one from 95. Had some great pictures of the Nevada Northern. So call me a closet Nevada Northern freak. It's just a great place.
Well, I'm glad you said something about going up the High Line there. They don't go very far east of town, but I just read a recent press release that they were awarded a sizable grant, and they're going to rebuild the line up to McGill, which is in place still, and there's a depot up there still. So they're going to be able to run their train from Ely to McGill now in the future. So I don't know when that's going to start or whatever, but that's very cool news. I also read that they're going to, that depot I showed you on the last picture from Curry that was all derelict, that they're talking about picking that up and moving it down closer and then running out to that. They do, evidently they do star trips where they take people out in the desert to look at stars because there's no light pollution out there. So that's be a place that they can go and I think maybe even stay overnight. So they've got some big plans coming up. The other thing that's been in the press, which you guys have probably seen, is that there's two diesel locomotives that are coming back home. One of them came out of Snoqualmie here about a month ago, RSD4 number 201, and then they're bringing back a SD7 from Utah, number 401. Both of those are going to be back on the property and restored into working condition as well.
Well, lots of equipment to continue to work on, but I can't say enough about the place. It's just tremendous. Hopefully, when we get back, we'll be able to get a real guided tour. This was just sort of an informal tour that my son and I had back in 2012, but we're looking for more of a formal tour sometime in the spring. So I'm really looking forward to it. If there's one place on your bucket list to go see big time authentic steam, it's the Nevada Northern.
Yeah, I was really impressed, even though I didn't get to ride them, but I got to see a fair amount of it, and it was really a thrill to be able to see that number 81 recently restored.
Well,
Let's-
unless you're a real jackass, the staff there, almost everybody seems to appreciate the fact that you did have to go 400 miles out of your way to get there. They're very pleased that you came to see them and their equipment. And as long as you behave yourself, why, they're extremely accommodating.
It's not around a corner. And if you do come from Las Vegas, about halfway up is a neat old mining town, ghost town called Pioche, Pioche. If you're into old funky mining towns, that's definitely one you want to check out.
Well, I have good feelings about Ely because Mary just won a jackpot up at Wendover on our way down.
Hey, Brian, why don't you stop your screen share so we can see everybody again?
Here's a thought for people. If you want to be entertained some more tonight, I think Russ Segner put this on. I don't know whether it's 40 PNR where the source is, but just go to YouTube. And they just moved the is it the RSD from Snoqualmie, I believe.
Yeah, the 201. 201.
And they have some YouTube video of two cranes moving that locomotive onto the Nevada Northern Rail. And you've never seen somebody pick up they moved the trucks first, picked the locomotive up, this incredible truck carrier, and then zigzagged it back and forth because they had to pick it up, say in horizontal, turn it to vertical, move it over to the other train, turn it back to horizontal, and set it down. If you want to see modern cranes moving a diesel engine, go on YouTube and see if you can track it down. I wish I could give you the link, but it's incredible seeing them move that RSD onto the Nevada Northern.
I wonder if that EMD switcher that Brian showed on the VNT, I wonder if that's the old NP one that used to putt around Harbor Island. Bob, do you have any idea?
Which one, Jim?
That diesel switcher.
The
Wasn't that
SW12. The SW1200.
Yeah.
The SW1200 was XNP number 146.
Did you say SP?
NP. I'm sorry.
NP. Yeah. I wonder if that's the one that putted around Harbor Island until quite late.
I don't know. It was built in 1957. I know that. So it's actually quite late.
Yeah.
It went to BN 205 and then it became BNSF 3540 and then it went to EVRAS, which I don't know who that is, as the 3540, and then it's now at BNT.
Okay.
It was number 146 NP.
The Nevada Northern also has an operating steam derrick, which they'll pull out of the roundhouse once in a while and do a demonstration.
I've seen YouTube videos of that. They actually demonstrated it the day after I was there. I didn't stick around for that, but they showed it to that group the next day. I'll have you just for information, the day after I left there, it snowed. It's like 31 degrees.
You're up at about 7,000 feet there.
Yeah.
What was the date of your trip, Brian?
I left on the 21st of September and I got back on October 12th, I think, or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Were you driving by yourself all this time?
I did.
Yeah. That sure makes it easy to make decisions when you don't have to accommodate, somebody else's.
What are you saying, Jim?
What kind of camera were you using, Brian?
iPhone 10.
That's
Or
amazing.
iPhone 7. I'm sorry.
Okay. They're beautiful shots, just beautiful. Wow.
It's amazing. I rode the RGS special out of Encinitas with the 20 and the 455. And it's amazing what a cell phone will shoot these days. So, you know, we should, all these things that we get to do are really cool.
You know, you're right. What would you give to have just a simple, you know, video back in 1950 on your favorite places?
I know what I
I'd
was
kill to
saying.
drive along Ruston Way in 1948 in Tacoma with a video. Oh my gosh.
Can you guys imagine what they would have done if they had iPhones in 1948?
Really?
That would be an iPhone taking all those pictures. That was incredible. The quality is excellent.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would show up at these, you know, at these photo lines on the Cumbres and Toltec, and all these guys had these big monstrous cameras with these lenses, and I had my little iPhone out there. So I'm sure they looked down their nose at me, but.
Well, Brian, here's the thought. I rode the RGS special out of Encinitas with the 20 and the 455. And yeah, the iPhone took incredible shots. That was a Trains magazine special also. What was the date of the Nevada Northern Trains magazine special?
It was somewhere around the 10th and 11th of October, is the second weekend of October there, I think.
Yeah, mine was August 31st. I think Jim Wren scheduled all that stuff maybe. And the tragedy is he's the editor of Trains magazine. He's got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And poor guy, but thank goodness for what he's doing. You know, he's getting all these special runs going. You know, and it's neat for all these trains that he's doing.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's terrible. He's been one of the better editors since David Morgan. Oh gosh.
I stumbled onto a couple of years ago when they were doing the Skookum run down on the Oregon coast, and I showed up out there, and Steve Carter was there with his drone, and he and I were kind of the scabs that hadn't paid. And so we were, you know, kind of trying to take pictures, and we got yelled at a couple times because we were in the way of the photo line or something. So I kind of knew what to expect. Steve kind of got yelled at because he didn't want his drone making noise while they were filming the trains. So that was kind of funny, but you know, you can't complain because we hadn't paid anything. So
Same son and I did the trip down to Garibaldi, and we chased the Skookum back in 2019, and there were actually 2 trains, and it was a Trains magazine.
Yeah, that was the one
That was
the one I was at too.
Yeah,
I probably saw you.
we may have crossed paths.
Yeah, they were running the was it the Rainier? The other one? Yeah, it was the Rainier.
Yeah, and they were the Skookum was pulling log cars and all that. That was an awesome day. The weather was great.
Yep.
In March.
Well, very good, Brian. Thank you very much. Let me do the close-up stuff here, and then we can stay on and talk for anybody that wants to. So I'm going to share
Terrific, Brian. Just terrific. The quality of the photos is really, really good, and love your point of view as a model railroader. I mean, you took pictures of the really cool stuff.
You trained me well, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Brian.
Well, you know, I when you take 10,000 pictures, you can usually find a couple good ones in the batch.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yes.
the secret to good photography. Take 10 pictures and throw away 9.
For anybody that's interested in the V&T, a special event, 4th of July weekend down at the museum in Carson City, they're going to have a 150th celebration of the completion of the line from Carson City up to Reno. At the museum, they're anticipating steaming up the Lake Tahoe #1 that you saw in the pictures. Also the number 18, the Dayton, V&T number 25. They'll have the McKean running, the Gillen Bend motor car, and they're trying to bring in a number of other locomotives. That's still in the planning process, but they're hoping to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 steam locomotives that'll be operating that weekend there at the museum in Carson. So it should be a really good event. And I'm sure that the folks up at the railroad in Virginia City will be running special runs up and down the hill as well.
If they have all those locomotives there this summer, they don't have that much track at that museum, do they?
No, they've got the one loop. So
Yes. Gonna be
it'll be
pretty
a little interesting. Yeah, well, and they're talking about when the Carson City Engine House opened in 1873, I think it was, the old stone fort. They emptied the place, what was still brand new, and had a huge party. I invited everybody. So what they're hoping to do, they want to recreate that as well, which means they're going to move everything out of the car barn and the engine house and to set up for the back. So I don't know where they're going to put it all. That's a really good question. Because you're right, they've got a loop of the turntable and a bunch of sidings. So we'll see what they work out.
Have to write some train orders for that operation.
Yep.
Is that the Reno behind you?
Yes. Yeah, that was you. You and I were there probably about 3 days apart. The V&T conference was in Carson City that same weekend that you were in Northern Nevada. And they had just brought the Reno up, and Tom Gray had it still sitting there at the depot in Virginia City, so we could all see it. And that was amazing. We've been talking about trying to figure out a way to get that locomotive back up to Carson City or Virginia City for probably 40 years, and there it is. It's just
My understanding is
amazing.
it's been very hard used.
Yes. Well, and it burned badly in a forest fire, a wildfire, quite a few years ago. Lost a couple of the old V&T wooden coach and a boxcar that were with it. And supposedly melted the frame, but they're trying to figure out how they can repair it. Tom Gray has insisted he's going to have that thing running again. So we'll see.
Bob Butler, I bet you remember that 440. I think it was that Nez Perce locomotive. I might be mixed up on this. An NP1, it was at Union Station in Seattle for a while. And then I think it went down and ran for a little while on the V&T up and down the hill.
Which one are you talking about?
Oh, I can't remember the number. I just remember it was a 440.
They did, Jim, you're right. They did have a 440 up in Virginia City for a while. I don't recall where it came from or where it went.
Well, I'm just relieved to find out that I didn't make that up.
No, you're correct. They did have a 440 up there for a while.
Okay.
Would have been.
It was XMP.
It was never,
80s, I think.
the one you're talking about, it's a Dardanelle in Russellville at one time. It was a movie engine. It was at the Sierra in the 70s and Sacramento in the early 80s.
Okay.
Nevada State Railroad Museum, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I can
it's at the
remember seeing
museum.
it on display one weekend at Union Station in Seattle.
Is this a narrow gauge one or a standard gauge one we're talking
Standard.
Yeah.
V&T is standard gauge.
I'm quite sure it was never NP. NP has that I know.
Okay. Well, I was only half wrong. Hell, I'm improving.
Yes, it did run up at Virginia City like in 1976, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds about right.
So Bob, this event at Carson City on the 4th, they're bringing in all these locomotives, but all they've got there is a loop. Is there any kind of outside, any kind of an interchange with an outside railroad, or are they bringing these things in via lowboy?
They'll have to bring them in, bring truck.
Oh man.
Yeah, similar to them getting the Glenbrook to Chama. So it'll be interesting. No, there's no rail connection between the museum and the V&T running up to Virginia City, nor between either one of them and the rest of the world up at Reno, which is unfortunate.
Now there's there is or there was a large stone roundhouse. Was that Carson? Is it still there or was it demolished?
It was demolished, I want to say late 80s.
Okay, I think we've had this conversation before. Yeah.
The rectangular one?
Yes, the
Yeah.
stone fort.
Yeah.
Yeah, it unfortunately it was demolished.
So the building you were talking about where they had the party, what was that?
That engine house.
Okay. So it doesn't exist anymore, or it does?
Does not.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a weird yard ladder they had because it was rectangular, and there was no turntable. It just had a series of turnouts branching off.
No, actually, Jim, actually there was a turntable, and it's kind of a unique because when the tracks came together for the turntable, they actually crossed each other. So they overlapped.
Boy, I must be thinking of the earliest construction.
The
'Cause there
original, you're correct. The original old engine house on the west end of Carson, a 3-stall rectangular, it did just have switches.
See, that's what I get for being old.
You're around when they built it, huh?
Yeah, I remember stuff that was true, but only if you go back 100 years. Oh, geez. As I was watching Brian's show, I just kept thinking of the slides I took around there in the late 50s. But I never did get up to Chama. I was pretty much around Durango and Antonito and some of those.
Brian, you were talking about that flume and the flume that was, and then Jim Sable mentioned down on Goldendale. It actually went clear down to the river. Does anybody know anything more about that? I remember seeing that as a kid, but didn't take any pictures of it.
Well, I can remember standing on the walkway next to the flume, and the flume was about between belt and chest high. And it was the opposite of the green chain, where guys pick green lumber off the saw and start sorting it. This was the opposite. This is going into the mill out of the flume. And I'm trying to think of what the end of the flume was like. They dumped it into a creek, but I can't think of the name of the creek. And I'm pretty sure it's called Broughton Lumber Company. It's close to Goldendale, but it's not. I'm a little off on that too. But I can't think of the name of the burg. Well, it's not far from Goldendale.
Might have been Stevenson.
That's it. It's Stevenson. Yeah.
No, it was not near Stevenson. My sister lives there. It was quite a bit up the river. I was able to go out and see it when it was still in operation. But the timbers would come down, they'd be picked out, and then the water would continue and discharge into the creek.
Yeah. And it was right about, belt high or between your belt and your chest. And the guys would just pick them out like the opposite of a green chain and kick them onto the inbound.
You guys know how long that was?
It wasn't 100. It wasn't a long ways.
No, it was quite maybe 10 miles total.
Yeah.
It was way up high on the bluff. You can also see it in video they made of the Lassie show where the Lassie was riding the timbers down.
Well, if the burg there isn't Stevenson, what is it?
Bingen?
I don't know. That's just lost. I can't remember. But Stevenson rang a bell. I thought that was right.
Well, that one down in California, you think about it, 54 miles.
Yeah.
That thing must have piled up sometimes and had some huge jams in it.
It did. Uh-huh.
I saw an excellent presentation this summer on one of these NMRA, I can't even remember what it was, but the guy did a whole history of the Sugar Pine Lumber Company, and he had photos of the mill. There was multiple flumes that came out of the mill that fed into that thing. So there's like multiple lines in the mill cutting the lumber, feeding that thing.
Yeah.
And they were curved into one then and started down the hill.
The little boats that, they had little boats that went down the flume that guys would actually ride in order to save walking the planks all the way down with the picaroons to break up jams. And those were called pigs, the little boats were. And that's what they rode to town Saturday night to get to the saloons in.
How'd they get back up?
They must have had speeders. I don't know. I don't know. I've never heard any stories about loggers getting back Monday morning, only going down Saturday night.
Yeah, so there's if you do a search for that Madera sugar pine, there is a photo all over the web of a guy in a little shack that was one of the flume watchers. And I just can't imagine sitting there all day waiting for a jam up, but they got paid to sit there and monitor the flume and make sure that it was flowing.
Well,
And
the
they had-
water,
Huh?
the water keep going, and that lumber would end up on the ground.
Yep.
It did.
Jam.
Well, it was kind of like section crews on the railroad. A guy would have a certain territory to patrol. He would hike up and then hike down, then hike up and hike down, carrying his pick with him. I don't know how long his territory was, but he didn't just stand still waiting for something to happen. The Puget Power flume up there at Electron was a box flume instead of that V shape, but it wasn't for the purpose of moving lumber. It was for the purpose of moving water down to the cofferdam.
While we were talking, I brought up the Broughton flume built between 1921 and 1923 by the Drano Flume and Lumber Company from Little Salmon River, 9 miles to Hood, Washington on the Columbia River. And there are a couple of videos, it looks like, about that if you're interested in that.
Well, I got the Broughton part right anyway.
Yep.
I also found a little book I have on something called the San Lorenzo Valley Flume, which I don't know where that is. I think it's in California somewhere. But there are some photographs and drawings in it of the flume and the things you were talking about in terms of people needed to be tending the flume and what happened when it plugged up. Fascinating.
That'd be neat. Bring it to the meeting, Don.
I will.
Yeah. More exciting than flumes were chutes. There were chutes along steep parts of the Columbia River, like along Stella and some of those places, to get logs from way up high down the cliff face into the river. Holy cow. As wet as those logs were and as much water as they were running down the chute, it would be sending up plumes of hot steam by the time it got to the bottom from friction. And then it would hit the water at about 40 miles an hour in the river with a humongous splash. Those were really exciting. Holy smokes.